Your soulmate is about to confess they're married. But that's not the biggest secret. There are moments when the truth does not arrive with a warning, it simply appears. A thought comes out of nowhere. A memory suddenly feels different. A name crosses your mind when you were thinking about something completely unrelated. A quiet feeling tells you that something has changed, even though you cannot explain exactly what changed, and sometimes, the most important revelation begins with a secret that seems shocking on the surface but turns out to be only the doorway to something much deeper. That is the energy surrounding this message. Something happened last night. Someone spent time alone with thoughts they could no longer silence. They replayed conversations. They remembered moments they had dismissed. They thought about what they had hidden, what they had avoided, and what they were afraid you might discover, and somewhere in that quiet moment, one realization became impossible to escape: the truth cannot remain buried forever. There is a confession approaching. But before you assume you already know what that confession means, pause for a moment. Because the biggest secret is not simply that this person may reveal something about their relationship status, their past, or the complicated circumstances surrounding their life. The bigger secret is what has been happening inside them all along. They have been carrying an emotional conflict that they did not know how to explain. They may have appeared calm. They may have acted as though everything was normal. They may have continued with their daily responsibilities while keeping certain thoughts completely private. But beneath that ordinary surface, there has been a question growing louder. What am I going to do about the truth? That question may have followed them into the night. It may have been there when they looked at their phone. It may have appeared when they remembered your conversations. It may have returned when they were surrounded by other people but somehow felt completely alone with their thoughts. And that is why this message begins with a secret, not because every secret automatically means betrayal. Not because every relationship situation has the same ending, but because sometimes the information that shocks you first is not actually the information that changes everything. Sometimes the real revelation is emotional. Sometimes the real revelation is a decision. Sometimes the real revelation is discovering why someone behaved the way they did. And sometimes the truth is that a person has been living one version of their life while privately questioning whether it still reflects who they have become. You may be wondering why this message feels so specific. Perhaps you have experienced a strange sense of distance. Perhaps communication became inconsistent. Perhaps someone seemed unusually thoughtful. Perhaps there were moments when their words did not match their behavior. Perhaps you noticed that they wanted to say something but stopped themselves. Maybe there were conversations that almost became serious before suddenly changing direction. Maybe there were questions that never received clear answers. And perhaps, more than anything, you have been left wondering whether there was something you were not being told. If so, the important lesson is not to turn uncertainty into certainty. You do not have to assume the worst. You do not have to convince yourself that every unexplained moment has a hidden meaning. You do not have to chase answers from someone who is not ready to speak. Instead, remember this: truth does not become more valuable because you fear it. Truth becomes valuable because it allows people to make honest choices, and that is exactly what this story is about. a person reaching the point where avoiding the truth becomes harder than speaking it. Imagine the night. The world around them has become quiet, the conversations have ended, the distractions are gone. There is nothing left to hide behind. They look at the ceiling and begin thinking about everything that has happened. They remember the beginning, they remember what they expected, they remember what they promised themselves, and then they remember you, not necessarily because some mystical force is controlling their thoughts, but because certain people leave emotional impressions that are difficult to erase. A conversation can last 10 minutes and still be remembered years later. A small act of kindness can remain in someone's mind longer than 100 ordinary interactions. A person can walk away physically while still carrying unresolved questions emotionally. That may be what is happening here. There is unfinished emotional business. There is something that needs to be acknowledged, and the more they try to suppress it, the more obvious it becomes. They may have told themselves that they were being responsible. They may have believed that silence was the safer choice. They may have convinced themselves that nobody needed to know everything. But silence has a strange way of becoming heavy. At first, silence feels easy. Then it becomes uncomfortable. Then it becomes complicated. Eventually, it becomes impossible to maintain without consequences. And that is the stage where confession begins. Perhaps the first thing they say will not be the whole truth. Perhaps they will begin carefully. I need to tell you something. That sentence alone can change the atmosphere. Because once someone says those words, everything afterward becomes important. They may hesitate, they may look away, they may struggle to find the right words, they may explain that their situation is complicated, they may tell you about a marriage, a commitment, a relationship, or circumstances from their past that you did not fully understand. And you may feel shocked, you may feel disappointed, you may feel confused, you may even wonder why they waited so long. Those feelings would be understandable. But then comes the part that changes the entire conversation. The marriage or relationship status is not necessarily the deepest secret. The deepest secret may be the reason they have been afraid to tell you. Perhaps they feared losing your respect. Perhaps they feared being misunderstood. Perhaps they feared that once you knew everything, you would walk away. Perhaps they were ashamed of choices they made before they fully understood their consequences. Perhaps they have been trying to maintain an image of having everything under control while privately realizing that their life is far more complicated than anyone knows. And perhaps the most difficult admission will be this: I don't know how to fix what I created. That sentence can reveal more than any dramatic confession, because sometimes the secret is not another person. Sometimes the secret is regret, sometimes it is fear, sometimes it is confusion, sometimes it is the realization that a decision made long ago no longer feels aligned with the person they are today. But there is another possibility that deserves equal attention. The person may not actually be ready to change anything. They may confess simply because they cannot carry the secret anymore. That distinction matters. A confession is not automatically a promise, a feeling is not automatically a commitment, and words are not the same thing as responsible action. This is one of the most important lessons hidden inside the message. If someone tells you a difficult truth, listen carefully, but do not abandon your own judgment. Do not allow dramatic words to pressure you into making decisions before you. Understand the situation. If they are married or committed to someone else, their responsibility is to deal honestly with that relationship before asking another person to become emotionally involved. You deserve clarity, you deserve honesty, you deserve choices that do not depend on secrecy, and that is where this story becomes much deeper, because the real transformation may not be what this person does. It may be what you finally realize about yourself. For a long time, you may have believed that receiving the truth from another person would finally give you peace. But perhaps your peace was never supposed to depend entirely on someone else's confession. Perhaps the message is asking you to remember your own value before the confession even arrives. You do not need someone to choose you in order to prove that you are worthy. You do not need someone else's complicated circumstances to define your future. You do not need to compete with anyone. You do not need to decode every silence. And you certainly do not need to build your entire emotional world around a possibility. If this person truly cares, honesty will eventually have to become visible through responsible behavior. That is where words become meaningful. That is where promises become real. And that is where the secret begins to lose its power. Because secrets have power when they are hidden, truth has power when it is faced. Something may have happened last night that pushed this person closer to facing it. Maybe a conversation occurred. Maybe they received a message. Maybe someone asked them a question they could not answer comfortably. Maybe they saw something that reminded them of the life they had chosen. Maybe they simply reached an emotional breaking point, not a dangerous one, but a moment of clarity where they realized that pretending everything was fine was no longer working. Whatever the trigger, the important part is the realization. They cannot keep living in contradiction forever. They may have been telling one story publicly while privately asking another question. What do I actually want? That question is frightening because answering it requires responsibility. It means admitting that some decisions have consequences. It means acknowledging people who may be hurt. It means accepting that honesty can create uncomfortable conversations. It means understanding that sometimes doing the right thing does not produce an easy outcome. And that is why the confession may take time, not necessarily because the person does not care, not necessarily because they are planning something dramatic, but because difficult truth requires courage. Still, courage does not mean asking you to wait indefinitely. Remember that. You can have compassion for someone's confusion without becoming responsible for solving it. You can understand their fear without allowing their fear to control your life. You can care about someone's circumstances while maintaining boundaries. That is not cruelty, that is maturity, and perhaps that is the real spiritual message hidden beneath this entire situation. Sometimes you think the miracle is another person finally returning. But the deeper miracle is discovering that you no longer need to abandon yourself while waiting. Sometimes you think the answer is a confession, but the answer is actually clarity. Sometimes you think destiny means being guaranteed a particular person, but destiny can also mean becoming strong enough to choose what is healthy, honest, and peaceful. That distinction can change everything. if the person eventually comes forward and tells you they are married, listen without immediately deciding what it means. Ask questions if appropriate. Take time. Do not let shock make your decisions for you. And remember that you are allowed to say, "I need time to process this." You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to reconsider what you thought you knew. You are allowed to decide that secrecy is not something you want in your life. You are allowed to expect honesty. And if the person tells you that they have feelings for you, remember that feelings alone do not determine what should happen next. Responsible choices matter. Integrity matters. Respect for everyone involved matters. The strongest form of love is not always pursuit, sometimes it is restraint, sometimes it is honesty, sometimes it is stepping away from a situation until everyone involved can make clear choices, and perhaps this is why the biggest secret is not the marriage. The biggest secret is that this person has been learning something about themselves. They may have discovered that they cannot keep avoiding difficult questions. They may have discovered that appearances are not enough. They may have discovered that a life can look stable from the outside while feeling uncertain on the inside. They may have discovered that unresolved feelings do not disappear simply because you refuse to name them. And perhaps they have also discovered something about you. Maybe they realized that your presence represented honesty. Maybe they noticed that conversations with you made them think differently. Maybe they remembered how naturally they could talk to you. Maybe they realized that they had been comparing their current emotional life to the peace they felt during certain conversations with you. But again, do not confuse emotional recognition with a guaranteed future. A meaningful connection can teach someone something without becoming a permanent relationship. That is important, because you should never have to force a story into the shape you hoped it would take. Let truth reveal itself. Let actions speak. Let time expose what is genuine. And let your own values guide you. There is another layer to this message. The person may have spent the night rehearsing what they want to say. They may have imagined several different conversations. In one version, you understand. In another, you become angry. In another, you walk away. In another, you ask questions they are not prepared to answer. And every imagined ending brings them face to face with the same reality. They cannot control your reaction. That may be the hardest lesson of all. When you keep a secret, you sometimes imagine that you can control the moment of revelation. But once the truth is spoken, the other person gets their own choice. That is why honesty is powerful. It gives the other person freedom, and perhaps, somewhere in the quiet of last night, this person finally understood that. Maybe they realized that protecting themselves from your reaction was not the same thing as protecting you. Maybe they realized that withholding information prevented you from making informed choices. Maybe they recognized that whatever happens next, you deserve to know what is real. That realization may be the beginning of something important, not necessarily the beginning of a relationship, the beginning of honesty, and honesty can change the direction of an entire story. Perhaps you have been wondering why everything feels different lately. Maybe nothing visible has happened yet, but emotional shifts often happen before external events. Someone makes a decision internally before anyone else sees evidence of it, Someone chooses honesty before sending the message. Someone accepts responsibility before having the difficult conversation. Someone admits the truth to themselves before admitting it to anyone else. That could be what happened last night, a private acknowledgement, a moment when denial stopped working, a moment when the person finally said to themselves, "I have to be honest." Those words may not be dramatic, but they can be life-changing, and if you are the person waiting on the other side of that truth, remember something equally important: you are not required to become emotionally available to every confession. You are not required to forgive immediately. You are not required to accept an explanation simply because it sounds emotional. You are not required to rescue someone from the consequences of their choices. You can listen, you can think, you can protect your peace, you can decide what kind of relationship, if any, is healthy for you, and perhaps that is the unexpected secret this entire message has been leading toward. The secret is not simply what this person has hidden. The secret is that you have more power than you realized. You may have spent a long time waiting for another person's decision to determine what happens next. But your life does not have to remain paused. You can continue growing, you can continue learning, you can continue building friendships, dreams, confidence, and a future that does not depend on one person's timing. If they come forward honestly, you can evaluate that truth from a place of strength rather than desperation. That changes the conversation completely. Instead of asking, "Will they choose me?" you begin asking, "Is this situation healthy for me?" Instead of asking, "Do they secretly love me?" you ask, "Are their actions honest and responsible?" Instead of asking, "When will they finally confess?" you ask, "What do I need in order to feel respected and secure?" Those questions are powerful because they return your attention to something you can actually control: your choices, your boundaries, your future. And maybe the person on the other side of this story is learning something similar. They may finally be realizing that wanting something does not automatically make it right. They may be learning that emotions require responsibility. They may be learning that hiding difficult truths only makes them harder to handle later. They may be learning that every relationship deserves honesty. They may be learning that a person cannot build a peaceful future while refusing to acknowledge an uncomfortable past. That is a serious lesson, and it may be the real reason this confession feels so important. The secret is not simply information, it is transformation. A person is being forced to confront the difference between who they have been and who they want to become, and that confrontation can be uncomfortable. There may be tears, there may be silence. There may be apologies, there may be conversations that do not have easy answers, there may be moments when everyone involved needs distance, but difficult truth is still better than a beautiful illusion, because illusions eventually collapse. Truth gives people the opportunity to rebuild. You may also discover that the confession contains another unexpected detail. Perhaps the person has been married longer than you realized. Perhaps the marriage is complicated, perhaps it is separated, distant, strained, or simply different from what you imagined. Perhaps there are legal, family, financial, or personal circumstances involved. but you should not fill in those details yourself. Let the person explain, and if they cannot explain clearly, that itself is information. Clarity does not require you to become a detective. You should not have to investigate someone's entire life just to determine whether they are telling the truth. Healthy communication allows questions to be answered directly. That is why patience matters. Let reality reveal itself. Do not let sensational predictions become substitutes for facts. A spiritual message can inspire reflection, but real life decisions should be based on real information. That is especially important when another person's marriage or commitment is involved. There is dignity in refusing to participate in confusion. There is strength in saying, "I care, but I need honesty." There is wisdom in refusing to become someone's secret, and there is freedom in realizing that you do not need to fight for a place in someone else's life. If they want to build something honest with you someday, they must first create the conditions for honesty. That responsibility belongs to them. Meanwhile, your responsibility is to yourself. Protect your peace. Keep your standards. Do not let fear convince you that you have to accept less than clarity, and do not let excitement convince you that every confession is automatically destiny. The truth can be meaningful without being romantic. The truth can bring closure. The truth can bring understanding. The truth can help you finally stop wondering.